Love this podcast? Support it and sponsor today. Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.
Welcome to Hong Kong Confidential. I'm Jules Hannaford and I'm your host. I'm an Australian woman and I've been living in Hong Kong for many years. I'm a mother, a teacher, an author, and I want to share my wisdom and the wisdom of others with you. Thanks for joining me and I hope you enjoy the show.
You meet someone online and there's this instant connection. It's amazing how much the two of you just seem to click. They live somewhere far away and there's some plausible reason they can't travel to meet you. They tell you they're in love with you and you feel optimistic for the first time in a long time. They have a successful career, yet somehow they need money from you to solve a short-term problem, always with the promise of paying you back. Time goes on and they need more money more urgently. You've started to see the cracks and begin to wonder whether they've been lying this whole time. All of a sudden it hits you. You've been scammed. Fool Me Twice is the story of my mother, Jules Hannaford, a woman who was drawn into the dangerous world of sweetheart scams. After a trip overseas to meet a stranger, a dangerous altercation in a Manchester hotel room, and thousands of pounds lost for good, she's here to tell her story. Fool Me Twice, a true crime podcast, is available on Apple Podcasts, Ozcast Network, and anywhere you listen to your podcasts.
Today I'm here with Mandy Lee. Mandy, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
It's so exciting to meet you, and I've spent a lot of time researching you and looking through your book. Your story is fascinating and your cookbook looks absolutely amazing. So congratulations.
Thank you.
Tell me a bit about your background and how you came to live in Hong Kong.
Right. So I'm living in Hong Kong now. I was born in Taiwan. When I was 11 years old, my mom took me and my brother, and basically my family immigrated to Canada, but only my mom left with us and my dad stayed behind. It's a very typical Asian immigrant story where like the father stayed in the original country to support the immigration. And then so my mom took me to Vancouver and it was my brother. So there I pretty much spent my teens years in Vancouver. And then when I was 21, I moved to New York to go into art school. And that's another 7.5 years. So in 2008, when the financial crisis happened, my husband was transferred to Hong Kong. Like none of us are from, he was actually born in Hong Kong, but he never lived in Hong Kong. We took the opportunity and we left New York and then ended up in Hong Kong. A year and a half later, he was again asked to be transferred to Beijing. And none of us had ever really been to Beijing. So we're like, okay, sure. So we went to Beijing and that's when the whole debacle unfold. And then, so I started a recipe blog there. And then it later on became a book. And we left Beijing in 2016, I believe, and back to Hong Kong. And we've been here ever since. Yeah.
We'll get to the debacle in Beijing in a minute. But first of all, what was it like for you living in so many different countries and having to adapt to different cultures when you were younger?
I feel like my story is not a unique one. There are a lot of people from Hong Kong who went to Vancouver before the Taiwanese wave, before the 1997, going back to China and everything. So there was a first wave of that. And then the Taiwanese, the second wave. For me, I see it as a positive. For example, when people ask me where I'm from, I tend to say, what do you mean? Because are you meaning my ethnicity or where am I living currently? What do you mean? Because I pretty much spent a decade in Taiwan, a decade in Vancouver, a decade in New York, and then a decade back in Asia. So it's quite complicated. But I think I deal with it quite well because maybe this is different from most people. I don't feel the need to belong anywhere. I don't feel the need to attach myself to a certain identity. Well, I kind of thrive in this ambiguity situation where I feel I'm able to see things from a more objective perspective because I don't owe allegiance to a country or identity or anything. Like, I don't consider myself Canadian or American or Taiwanese. I'm just human.
That's
So,
brilliant. You don't see
yeah.
yourself really as a third culture kid, because a third culture kid typically feels like they don't belong anywhere, but you don't feel that need to belong anywhere.
I also don't feel like I don't belong anywhere, but I don't see that as a negative.
Right.
I see that as a positive. I feel especially nowadays, you started to see more and more people too emotionally attached to a certain identity that they can't seem to rationally discuss anything anymore, because it's almost everything that side of the party says, I will agree, and anything else, I will disagree. They can't critically think for themselves anymore. And I don't feel like that, because I just feel I never really speak from a point of view that is firmly based on Taiwanese point of view or a Canadian point of view or American point of view. To me, it's, if it makes sense, it should make sense regardless. Yeah.
So that's really obviously a bit of a blessing. And the world is getting smaller and smaller. We're really becoming very much a global universe. And I guess you're the new millennials of the era where you
Well,
fit
barely. I'm 40, so I'm.
Oh my God. You're 40, you look amazing.
Yeah. So like I think I'm the
last year of a millennial.
Seat,
yeah.
last seat on the train.
I think I'm the last baby boomer.
Yeah.
Do you have a preference, or is there somewhere that is dear to your heart that you loved more than the other places, even though you managed to fit in wherever you were and you don't feel a sense of belonging to any of them? Did you love one place more than the other?
I love New York. In my book, I say that.
Amazing.
Yeah. In my blog, I made that very clear. But I don't love New York because I consider myself American-like. I just love New York because my personality tends to thrive in a place where they celebrate individual identities. They don't try to conform. Whereas Asia, it's a very much a conformative society. Everyone is trying to fit in. In New York, you can walk on the street with like a chicken on your head and everybody should go, oh, look at that. Like people just be like, cool. Nobody cares in New York. And I find that very freeing. So I would definitely say.
Yeah, they embrace diversity and inclusion and difference, and it's really nice, especially because that's not common.
Celebrate it. So they don't try to be all the same. And then I feel one of the biggest disagreement I have with living in Asia is that everyone sort of tries to do the same thing and then go on the same path, and nobody really try to say anything different that's from the norm. Maybe they're afraid that they will be outcast. In New York, of course, there's a certain aspect of that as well. New York is a mostly democratic city. So if you're a Trump supporter, you're probably not going to fare well. It celebrates a lot more individuality. And then I love that. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I love that as well. I mean, one thing about Hong Kong and everybody conforming, it's working very well at the moment with the virus because everybody is social distancing, wearing their masks, following recommendations, and our numbers are low and our death rate is low. Mm-hmm. So that is an example of the kind of Hong Kong conformity paying off.
Right. Like a once in a millennial, millennia incidents. Yeah, that pays off.
One time, yeah. I really want to hear about your company called Big Bone that you started in New York. I was really fascinated about that. How did that come about and why did you start it?
I'm a huge dog lover. Like, I love dogs.
For our listeners out there, your Instagram handle is Lady and the Pups?
Yeah, Lady and Pups.
Lady
and
a
lot of people are like, what is pup? Like, they thought it was some kind of a food name or something. I'm like, no, it just means dogs, And so I went to New York to study architecture design. And when I graduated, I practiced in architecture firms for like about 6 months. And then I hated it, At the time, another schoolmate of mine was working in another company and she also hated it. And at the time I was kind of like toying with this idea of like, oh, I'm just gonna like bake dog foods and then like deliver them. She probably also was miserable in her job. So she jumped at the idea. I was like, okay, yeah, let's do it together. And we're like, oh, really? So we both quit our jobs. And then we started this company called Big Bone. It was supposed to be big boned with a D at the end. Kind of like a funny, jokey way to call dogs that are fat. But I ended up, when I was registering for the company, I didn't put the D in and it ended up being Big Bone LLC. And
I
then
can imagine
my
when you
husband
search
was
for
like,
it. Yeah, it's
oh
porn.
shit. It's like, yeah, he's like, oh, good luck finding a website for that. So later on, we're like, oh yeah, you're right. It's bigbone.com is like, okay, you don't want to go there. So yeah, so in my book, I was just like, I apologize if anybody went to bigbone.com and it got flashed by
Yeah.
mail parts. I'm sorry.
That is so funny.
Yeah.
That is.
But then that was around 2007 and 2008. Amidst of, trying to figure out how to get this company up, my husband was offered a transfer. So at the time, it doesn't make sense to stay in New York for something that is so in baby stage. So we ended up moving. So yeah.
Where did your love of dogs come from? Does that stem from your childhood?
I've wanted dogs when I was little, but my mom is still allergic to dogs and didn't like dogs. She changed because she ended up having to take care of one of my dogs when I first went to New York. And then she just couldn't stop talking about the dog like 2 months later.
Oh, she really
So now
started liking them.
but she only likes her own dog. So that's the difference, right? The first time when I was 18, I moved out to live on my own. The first thing I did was I got myself a dog. I just really wanted a pet, but I didn't know how big of a part dogs are going to play in my life. I can't really imagine anybody who's ever not a family dog, but taken care of a dog on their own and then raised them and spend every day with them and not fall in love, because they probably love you more than anyone else on earth loves you, right? They probably love you more than you. Yeah. So like, to me, that's just unconditional love. And then, I just love them. And the more I love dogs, there's a side effect to that. The more I love dogs, the less I like people.
I've got a friend just like that.
Yeah. So there's a side effect to that. Yeah.
People. Yeah.
Because you start to see dogs as a victim and you see all the horrible things that human has done to them. And you just you couldn't help but say, oh my God, I hate myself. Yeah. So that has unfortunately became who I am nowadays. I'm more of a dog person than a person nowadays.
Yeah, I can really relate to that. Not myself, but my close friend is exactly the same.
Yeah.
Tell me about getting to Beijing. And you say that that's where the debacle began. And I know that that's where you started your angry food blog in Beijing. What happened when you got there and how were you impacted by the move?
I started the blog 2 years after I left. So there's a good 2 years where I made a good effort to try to make a life there, and it didn't happen. In the book, I said before I moved to Beijing, growing up as a Taiwanese, any Taiwanese would agree with me that you were fed on one level or another some sort of a propaganda from the public education of this hostility against China, right? Like they are the bad guys and we're the good guys, all that. But after leaving Taiwan and then growing up, you realize later on, you learn that not all of what you were taught was true. And so which part is true and which part is not true? Are they all fake or are they some, so I don't know. So before I moved to Beijing, I was actually quite curious about what I'm going to find because I've never been to China. I've never lived in China. I wonder if what I've heard from childhood was true or it was all just, again, just some kind of propaganda. So I moved there and it didn't really correct itself. It turned out that living in an authoritarian environment is really, really tough. For me personally, I'm not going to speak on behalf of all the other expats because I know plenty of expats who live there who just don't care. They don't think that has anything to do with them. But living in Beijing, the whole idea that you need permission to say something or to listen to something or to watch something is a completely foreign and very disagreeable idea that I just could not live with. Because a lot of people would argue that, you can just get a VPN and then you can do whatever you want. Well, first of all, no, that's not true because VPN sometimes doesn't work. It's controlled by the government as well. And second of all, it's more needing the permission to do something. It's not about whether or not I can find a loophole or not. It's the problem of why I should. I had a huge conflict with that. But at the same time, if the choice was up to me, I would have left. Obviously, I wouldn't, I was just left immediately. But also because of my husband's job and then he has his career aspiration and I didn't feel that it was right for me to say, fuck it, I'm going to go and then fuck what you want, right? Because he's a much more mellow person. And he adapted to Beijing much, much better than I could. So I felt that was an unfair demand to ask from him. So for 2 years, I tried to make friends, join the society and all that. But just every time I go out or if I have a conversation with either local or expats, I just could not find any agreement in this subject because like either people don't care or the local Chinese people get very defensive when you start talking about politics because they can separate the identity between the party, between the country and themselves. They feel like they are one. So if you attack the country, you're attacking them. And under that condition, I just grew more and more willing or reluctant to go outside because every time I go outside, I came home, I'm just in a bad mood. So I ended up staying home more and more and more. And I was miserable. And I always loved cooking. Like cooking has always been a hobby for me. But at that point on, this is funny because no one could relate to this. And then this pandemic happened. And then all of a sudden, everyone can relate to it.
Yeah,
because now everyone is like baking bread. You cannot get flowers anymore. And everyone is cooking more and more like crazy because you need that distraction from all this. You can't be stuck in your own anxiety all day. You need to find something else to get your mind off of it. And that's what I did. I just cooked all day. And then at one point, my husband was like, oh, why don't you just start a blog and then putting the recipe online? And then before that, I used to think that bloggers are losers, like, I'm sorry. Like I said this in the book and I apologize. I said that like I apologize to my people. You are nice, genuine, talented people. But at the time, I didn't read blogs. I still don't read blogs. And I just don't understand the appeal of following what other people eat for breakfast, lunch, and dinner and all that. I just don't get it. So at the time, it was more like, okay, I give up. I'll be a nobody and a loser for the rest of my life. I'll just be like, this fucking like lose on her recipe on the blog and that's going to be my life. So, so that's what I did. But it kind of took a weird life of its own. And and it all turned out okay.
Did you get quite a lot of followers and a lot of interest in your blog from the early days?
In the beginning, no. Like in the beginning, I'm just pretty much talking to myself. In the beginning, when I was writing the blog, I didn't want to use the word you. For example, like, oh, you might think, or you, because I feel like by saying you, I'm implying like as if somebody's listening to me. So that's a delusion and I refuse that. So like in the beginning, I was just like, yeah. But then slowly, people start to come in. And that's the funny thing though. In the beginning, it was just ladyandpups.com. And then because of my very opinionated nature, I started to get like angry comments. And then I put the angry food blog as a disclaimer. And then after that, I said home cooking with extreme prejudice. So I'm just like, if that's not your thing, don't come in here because like,
So that's really brilliant. Like when I was reading your book, I love the way you shared some of your story and your anger and how you came to where you were and your sort of attitudes towards certain things. And you take no prisoners and you make no apologies for who you are. And I think that's really wonderful. I think more people could really take a leaf out of your book and just be more true to themselves. I think it's really admirable what you're doing. And I also think there's a really fantastic level of dark humor in everything that you do. So I find you incredibly funny. Like I really was laughing out loud when I was reading your cookbook. I think that's great. Did your blog draw people to your Instagram or did your Instagram draw people to your blog?
I'm going to say it's kind of like a two-way traffic. In the beginning of the blog, I didn't have an Instagram account. I wasn't planning on having one. But then I think 1 year in or like a few months in or something, I started to realize that is kind of an essential tool to draw more viewership. So I came up with an Instagram account. So I would say in the beginning, maybe the blog readership goes on to follow my Instagram. And then later on, it was more balanced. Like, people may find my Instagram account first and then they go to the blog. I'm going to say, it's kind of equal.
Both.
Yeah.
I think it's really amazing that you turned your blog then into a really beautiful, brilliant cookbook. And the title of the book is called The Art of Escapism Cooking, which I think really does symbolize where at the time in your life and the fact that you were using it to escape from the other parts of your life that you weren't enjoying and you were using it to help build up your well-being and your state of mind. Is that correct? Is that a right interpretation?
Yeah, that is correct. I think it's just a personality thing. I'm quite fixated on being very honest, either with myself or with other people. So in the book, I also said that I'm not sure that was a healthy thing to do because I basically just shut myself out. And then I sort of called it from a hobby, it became kind of an addiction. And I do mean that because it became this codependent relationships that helps me draw out real problems that I don't want to deal with in my life. And back in like when I was living in Beijing, for example, if I'm just sit there all day, I get jitters from, oh, like I have to find something to cook. Like, what is the next thing that I'm going to make? So it's kind of like an addict that you're holding on to this substance or activity that helps you not focus on the real problem at hand. That's sort of a survival mechanism that, I had to develop to deal with my life. I touched on this more on the blog, but less so in the book. And also because during my time in Beijing, we brought 2 dogs to Beijing. And then in Beijing, we adopted another one. And the original 2 dogs whom we brought to Beijing, they got sick 2 years into the blog or something. And then again, this is funny because, before the pandemic, nobody could relate to this, but I ended up staying home, almost not going anywhere for 2 years because my dog, he had congestive heart failure and he needs he needs the medication every 6 hours. And there are 8 pills that has to be divided a certain way and then fed to him a certain way. I just couldn't trust anyone else but myself to get it right. And then I couldn't trust anyone. And he needs constant monitoring. I couldn't trust anybody to notice the very subtle change in behavior every day that would tell me that, oh, he's not feeling quite well today. And then, so I just don't trust anybody else to do that. I was like basically a home nurse for an elderly person, if I could say so, which is true because he was 15 years old for a good 2 years. In Hong Kong, there's no lockdown. So everyone is still going out and about in their lives. But I think it's more like people in Europe and the US could relate to that. Is that you don't go anywhere. And I just imagine that goes on for 2 years. So that put a really huge danger of depression on my psyche.
How did that affect your mental health? Did you feel like you got depression or
I feel like I certainly was in a minor depression, but like without this addiction on the side that can take my mind off of it sometimes, like I think that I would have probably just went into an emotional meltdown. But at the time I was just sort of keeping myself busy with cooking and then writing the blog or connecting with other people. And also this like illusion of having an online community, which is now how like everyone is communicating nowadays. Even though it's not a person-to-person interaction, it's still better than nothing. If you're locked down and you don't have internet, I think a lot of people with mental health issue would probably like committed something really horrible. So I think that at the time, not just cooking, but also the blog is a way of like me reaching out, or the Instagram is me like reaching out to the outside world that gave me an illusion that I have some kind of a support system. Otherwise, I don't think
you do, because you connect with your listeners and they respond to what you say. And I think also I can imagine a lot of people who were reading your blog and then after that getting your cookbook probably really were drawn to your honesty and your situation and the fact that they could relate to a lot of what you were going through, I imagine.
Yeah. There are a lot of people who are like, oh, I could totally relate to your situation, or like, oh, my dog also got sick, especially a lot of people who's either recently lost their dog or their dog is sick, they came to me like, oh, I totally understand how you feel. So the feeling of like you're not alone is really important if you're going through a long-term crisis like that.
What inspired you to put a lot of that personal journey into your book rather than just doing a cookbook with recipes and images? Why did you decide to write around it?
I think because it was by far the darkest period of my life that I had to live through. And we left in haste. We left Beijing because 3 months after my dog passed away. And then when he passed away, all of a sudden I was just, this is too much. I have to get out of here, because every corner and every house, it reminds you of this ordeal that you just lived through. So we sort of packed up and fled. Really, I was saying, I left as an emotional refugee. And I meant that because I would just basically fled the place. And then I didn't really have time to process what happened there. Why was I so unhappy? Was it me? Was it the environment? What was it? And then the whole process of writing the cookbook helped me organize. It wasn't an internal conversation. It's as if I'm my own shrink. I'm asking myself questions, answering, like trying to be as honest as I can. What exactly happened? What went wrong? What went right? Like who's right? Who's wrong? And I think during that process, it gave me some kind of a closure. Like I had to put it into an organized thought and then say, okay, now that's done with. We can put it aside and I can move on, instead of having this huge, what the hell happened in the back of my mind.
It's a bit of a self-help book, really, which I think is really lovely. And you can see that, like, I was so drawn into it. I am absolutely going to buy it. I really was like,
Thank you.
Yeah, I want to read more of this book. And the recipes look amazing and the photography is like unreal. Did you do the photography?
Yeah, I did. It
Wow.
was a one-person operation. Yeah, well, my husband is kind of the hand model sometimes. But
Right. I'm so impressed.
Thank you.
And in the book, you say that cooking is a deeply personal, ever-evolving, solitary sport. Why do you feel that that's true?
Because the reason why I cook is very, very different from why most people cook. Most people cook so that they can have something to eat, right? That would be the objective. I don't care about the eating afterwards. Like in the book, I also say eating and cooking for me is two completely different activities. Like I cook because it's playing a video game. And I've said this many times. It's like, I'm not looking to repeat the same game over and over and over again. I'm trying to get to the next level. And after that, the next level. I'm looking for challenge. And I'm looking for, every time I start a recipe, it's not because I want to eat it. It's because I want to answer a question in my head that I don't understand about that recipe, right? Like, oh, what is gluten and how does it form and how do I, why? There's a lot of curiosity. I cook because I'm curious about what would happen and why it happened. So that's why I cook. And to me, it's a solitary sport because I'm not trying to make anyone happy. I'm not trying to feed my husband. I'm not trying to feed my children. I'm not trying to entertain anyone. It's just me in the kitchen in an ongoing investigation. So that's why I characterize it like that, because I don't want people to have the misconception that I am trying to preach escapism cooking or I'm trying to teach anybody how to cook. No, I don't care. I don't care if I taught anybody how to cook. I don't care if you learn anything. I wrote this book completely and utterly selfishly for myself. Does that make any sense? Yeah.
Your writing is raw and it's descriptive and it's passionate. And I mentioned your dark humor. And I can see just from talking to you that that's really who you are in real life. So you've just poured yourself into that book, haven't you?
I did. Yeah. I'm pretty much an open book. I think my husband says like, that's my number one problem is that I say the same thing to every person because they're like normal people. They have a filter and then they say different versions of certain things based on who they're talking to. They're like, but you just meet someone stranger on the street for the first time in your life. And then you would say the same thing to this person as if you've known them, but like you don't talk to people like that. And so that's my problem.
Do you ever reflect later and regret what you say or feel paranoid about what you've done or that you've been too negative? Or are you completely happy in your own skin and you're absolutely fine with the way that you interact with the rest of the world? I think that speaks to having a level of self-confidence, which you seem to have.
I think that I've learned my lesson through a lot of things that I've said that offended people or hurted people throughout in my 20s or even in my 30s. And I've learned that because the way that my brain functions, when I say something, it's not a personal statement or attack that I am instating to the person I'm speaking with. When I'm saying something, it's purely a logical statement that I feel is right and makes sense. And if you don't agree, let's engage in a debate, not arguments. Right? Because argument tends to involve emotion and everything. I was like, okay, let's debate. So if A plus B doesn't equal C, then why does it, to me, this is like a mental acrobat that's going on in my head. But I realized that most people don't function that way and most people don't talk that way. And if I'm talking to a more emotional person versus rational, they would tend to take what I say very personally. They would tend to think that I'm making a personal statement, whereas, I'm not. It's something that I have to curb, this urge of speaking my mind and whatever that's in my mind and everything that's on my mind. It's something that I have to learn how to curb. And I don't think I'm very good at it still.
But as you get older, we get more self-aware, don't we?
Yeah, we get more self-aware. It's also about empathy, I guess, like knowing that this person or the person that you're speaking to may not function the way that you function, and then understanding that that's not who's right or wrong. It's just that we're different.
Yeah.
I'm still sometimes like, I struggle with that, but
yeah, that's such
like
a great
I'm trying
point
to learn.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Do you get negative comments? I mean, you mentioned them earlier, a few trolls and things like that. How do you cope with that?
I don't respond. I have a number one policy. It's also on my Instagram as well. Like whatever the comment is, I will like the comment and I don't engage. I fully 100% support freedom of speech. You are allowed. This is open space. I put my stuff on the blog. It's public. Instagram is public. You are allowed to come in and say whatever the hell you want. Whatever the hell you want. But doesn't mean that I'm going to engage in an argument with you, because I think that's stupid.
Yeah,
because
it's wasting your time, isn't it?
Yeah, internet argument is stupid. Like this person expressed his view. Let's agree to disagree. Like, there's no point. You can go on and on and on and on. It's endless. So that's my policy, is that like I welcome all comments. And I never go on my Instagram and say, if you're a hater, don't comment. I'll be like, no, please comment, like swear, like, whatever, call my mother names. I don't care. Like, I really don't care.
That's
like,
brilliant.
Yay, great for you. Like,
yeah, that's such a good attitude. Yeah, I'm the same. I get some criticisms of my podcasts and things like that. And I'm just like, it's your opinion. That's fine. Whatever. I'm not going to get stressed
everyone is
about
entitled to their opinions. And I respect that. Yeah.
Yeah. I was reading in your book and you talk about cooking out loud. What is cooking out loud?
Right. So that's something that I start on Instagram. And it's because there are a lot of things that I make on a daily basis that doesn't make it to the blog, or it didn't make it to the book, because before starting the blog, I never measure out anything. When I cook, it's always about like intuitions or tasting, adjusting. But because the nature of a recipe is that you have to provide some kind of a measurement, so that's when I started to measure things. But normally when I cook, I don't measure anything. So I decided to put some recipes that I feel like has a more leeway in measurements, that you can, it has more playroom in terms of what you put in it or how much you put in it. If I made something like that, then I would put it under something I call cooking out loud. It's like thinking out loud, because when I cook, I just document what was going on in my brain and why I put certain things the way I put certain things. And you can use that logic to come up with your own formula.
Right, got it. Okay, that makes sense. Where did your passion for cooking stem from, do you think?
That's the funny thing, because like when I was little, I would like to think that I grew up, I don't like the word feminist because I think that word is completely twisted nowadays. But I grew up not resisting to turn into this like traditional role of a woman in the family, because my mom is a very, very traditional housewife, and she cooks, but she cooks not because she likes to cook. She just cooks because that's what she thinks she's supposed to do. And she complains about it all the time. And then when I was little, I watching her, I'm just like, well, if you don't like it, then why do you do it? I don't understand it. So when I was little, I used to think to myself that, oh, I'm never going to grow up and cook, because that is like just something that as if like every woman is supposed to do. So I kind of resisted that until when I was in high school. And then my mother used to, this is a very common activity in Vancouver for housewives, is that they play mahjong. So they would like invite her friends to play mahjong, but they need lunch. Usually the host, meaning whoever the house that they go to, the person will prepare the lunch. But my mom, she doesn't want to prepare the lunch. So she was like, okay, I'm going to give you $5 for each, which is 4 people, right? 4 people in the game. And then they're going to, if I can come up with a meal in under 20, then I get to keep the rest of the money. Sorry, I'm going to let my dogs out. Yeah.
So she
So
would pay
that's
you
how
to
I
cook.
started.
Oh,
So because
great.
I wanted to make some cash.
That's
I
fabulous.
want to make some money, but I ended up not making anything anyways. So that's when I started to cook, and it became kind of an hobby. Like I took an interest in cooking, but it was never a fanatical thing that occupied. I was just like, oh, I like to cook, and it's something that like, I do in my pastime, So I don't think that I was that great of a cook. In the beginning, I was just like throwing things together and making things up. And then if I fail, say like if I tried to make a dish and it failed, I would never ever try it again. Just like most people, like, oops, like, failure. Okay, quit. That's like,
Yeah.
that's my number one answer to everything that I can't do on the first. I was like, okay, quit. In the beginning, I cook like a normal person. Just like, you still like kind of semi-homemade. You buy this sauce and you put it in that and, it becomes edible, good enough. But after I moved to Beijing, it took another life of its own. Yeah.
Yeah. Has your book been selling well? And do you have any plans for another book?
You know what? I have no idea how it's been selling. Like, I don't ask my publisher that question. I do mean it when I said I wrote this book purely just for myself. I don't care if it sells well. Don't tell my publisher this. I hope she's not listening. I'm pretty sure my publisher thinks I'm the worst author ever.
Yeah, you're probably.
I'm just like,
you're probably a super easy client. You're not asking any questions, not bothering her.
Yeah, I wrote it. It was a sort of a closure for myself. I put it out there. You like it, great. If you don't like it, I don't care. I honestly don't know how many copies I have sold so far. I have no idea. Yeah. And in terms of second book, I think the answer is probably no. I don't do this for a living. It's a hobby. There's so many cookbooks out there that don't need to be out there. I'm sorry. That's just a fact. There doesn't need to be, like 130-minute meal.
Yeah.
Exactly. So if I don't have anything valuable to say, then I'm not going to squeeze something out just to say it. To me, it's pointless. Yeah.
What are your plans for the future?
Man, a lot of people ask me that question. I have absolutely no. I plan to retire from my retirement. That's
Kick back even more.
I plan to coerce my husband into retiring, and then we can just like all move. I do want to move out of Asia. Like, I don't have anything against living in Asia. I think Asia is great for certain things. I love Asian foods and I love Chinese food too. Like, a lot of the recipes in my book is inspired by Chinese cuisines. That part I'm going to miss. But at the same time, I just really miss living in the Western culture where I don't have to explain why I don't have children. I don't have to explain this. I don't have to answer to that. I just don't, because everyone just lives their life and no one cares. Yeah. So I really miss that.
Where would you like to go?
Oh man, I feel like there's a really old woman living in this semi-old body. I just want to go retire on a farm somewhere that I can afford. I just want to grow vegetables and have chickens and have some sheep that mows the lawn. Like, that has been my plan for the 5 years. I'm just like, I want to go die on a farm. Like,
well, I really hope you can live out your dream. That's absolutely brilliant. Mandy, my final question for you is, if you could change one thing in the world, what would it be?
Less people. It's not a popular idea, but this earth has too many people.
Yeah, we're a bit overpopulated. Yeah.
If I can change something, procreate less, adopt more.
Yeah.
Okay. Stop making more. Stop making more. There are plenty to go around.
Yeah. Yeah, there are. Mandy, thank you so much for meeting with me today and talking about your Angry Food blog and Lady in
Thanks for having me. Thanks for having me.
And congratulations.
Thank you.
If any of my listeners would like to find you on Instagram or buy your book or check out your book, how can they do that?
My Instagram is Lady and Pups. That's the account name. And when people ask me about where to buy the book, I'm actually not sure which bookstore in Hong Kong that carries my book. So I always tell people to go on Amazon.
Yeah. And
I feel like that's the easiest way.
You can buy it off your webpage, can't you? Lady and Pups webpage.
Yeah, ladyandpups.com is my blog. And then the Instagram is Lady and Pups. Yeah. And then there's a page on the blog. Also, like, if you follow the link in my Instagram profile, you can also find a link that gives you options or like online options of purchasing the book. Yeah, so that's where I would go. Yeah.
Great. Awesome.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mandy. My listeners out there, if you really enjoyed this podcast, please share it with your friends and family. And if you can go to iTunes to rate and review us, it'll help me get up the iTunes charts and help people find Mandy's book, even though she doesn't really care whether it sells or not, which is absolutely brilliant. But do check out her Instagram page, and I will have the links to Mandy's information in the show notes. And if you would like to sponsor Hong Kong Confidential, you can go to Patreon/Hong Kong Confidential, and for as little as $1 a month, you can hear Mandy's answers to 4 secret questions, because I'm going to ask her 4 more questions. That's just for the sponsors from my Patreon page. So if you'd like to hear those answers and the answers from my last 20 or so guests, then please head over to patreon.com/Hong Kong Confidential and sponsor little old Hong Kong Confidential and help with the production costs. Thanks again, Mandy. We're going to sign off here, and then I'll see you in a second in Patreon.
Great.
Okay, see you, everyone. Thanks for listening, guys.
Hi, Confidants. I want to tell you about my Patreon page. I've joined Patreon in the hope of getting sponsorship for my Hong Kong Confidential podcast. Patreon is a great way for my listeners to get on board and sponsor me with monthly payments, and that goes towards my production costs and rewards for my members. If you're interested in checking out my Patreon page, please go to patreon.com and search up Jules Hannaford or Hong Kong Confidential. I would really appreciate you visiting my page. So that brings us to the end of another Hong Kong Confidential podcast. I'm Jules Hannaford. Thanks for joining me, and I hope you'll be with me again next week. If you enjoyed today's podcast, please can you go to iTunes to rate and review it. I would really appreciate your feedback. You can email me at jules@hongkongconfidential.net, and you can find me on Facebook and Instagram at Hong Kong Confidential. If you'd like to hit me up on Twitter, it's at Jules Hannaford. I would love to hear from you.
Love this podcast? Support it and sponsor today. Simply head to AuscastNetwork.com for details.